When you decide to get into film photography, you often don't get much of a say over the exact camera that you'll be shooting with. Whether it comes down to what you can find cheap and affordable on eBay, what's available at a thrift store or vintage market near you, or, like me, the camera that you get gifted by a family member, often the cameras choose you. That's how I acquired this strange little camera, the Minolta Freedom Zoom 105i. This camera entered my photographic life at a weird time. After being disappointed by some underwhelming rolls from my Pentax IQ Zoom, I had started to swear off point-and-shoot cameras as often as I could, and I was knee-deep in a long-running rabbit hole into rangefinder cameras. This rabbit hole led me to the Fed 5B, which is still probably my favorite camera that I own right now. On top of my disillusionment with point-and-shoot cameras, around this time I was also gifted a family member's cache of Minolta gear, which on top of the Fed gave me a pretty serviceable and professional level gear setup just between those cameras. All of this to say, when I was gifted the Freedom Zoom for Christmas, I was, shall we say, whelmed. Obviously, I'll never turn down a camera, especially one as delightfully charming as the Freedom Zoom, but I wasn't ready for it just yet. Despite being a little bit whelmed by this camera, I still went home and loaded up a test roll of Kentmere 100 just to make sure everything worked well. Just from handling the camera, everything seemed to be functioning just fine, but it hadn't been tested and the rear LCD screen didn't work, so I figured it was better safe than sorry. I did take the Freedom Zoom along on a weekend photo walk that I went on with some film friends, but I only ended up taking a handful of photos on this camera. I was too busy testing out Phoenix 200 for the first time, and the boring old roll of Kentmere 100 that was in this camera was not the most exciting at the time, especially when I wasn't even sure that the camera worked yet, as this was just my test roll. After this photo walk, the Freedom Zoom sat on my shelf for quite a few months, unfortunately. This is around the time that Rachel and I discovered we'd be moving to Boston for her to pursue a PhD program, so as moves do, it consumed pretty much everything in our lives, and the test roll that I had started ended up being kind of forgotten in all of this. Once we moved and got unpacked and I got my camera shelf set up, however, the Freedom Zoom just kind of started calling to me. I don't know, there was something about it that really made me want to shoot it at this time. I started picking it up every now and then and taking it out to take a couple frames here and there just to keep the test roll moving, even if it was a little bit slowly. Finally, in January, I started my 1 year of black and white challenge, so this seemed the perfect time to finish out this test roll and finally see what this camera is all about. And boy, am I glad that I did. These results truly floored me. I half expected the roll to be blank since it hadn't been tested to my knowledge, so to get any results back, let alone results that came out as well exposed and as sharp as these did, I am over the moon excited about this. I did the stereotypical Gen Z thing and I posted a TikTok about this camera, and someone left a comment that left me very intrigued. It has a filter thread? Before we go down that rabbit hole, this seems like a good time to cover the specs of this camera. And I am going to use my phone to read this off because I'm not going to just remember all the specs for this. The Minolta Freedom Zoom 105i is a 35mm point-and-shoot camera released in the year of our Lord 1990. It has a 35 to 105mm f4 to 6.7 coated power zoom lens with a minimum focus distance of 2.3 to 3.9 feet depending on what focal length you're at. And like I mentioned a second ago, it does have a 40.5mm filter thread on it. Okay, hold on. I just got home from work and this camera does have a 40.5mm filter thread on it. What? Hold on. I didn't think I had any 40.5mm filters. I did find this circular polarizer filter though. So this should just, I guess it's right here on those ridges. Holy shit. No, it It does have filter threads. But I think this is the light meter. So it's not metering through the lens. So theoretically, you shouldn't use a polarizer or like a color filter. But you could definitely slap like a Pro Mist or something on here. Holy shit. This is actually kind of sick. Thank you for pointing this out because I totally missed this when I was messing with this camera. What? We'll come back to that in a minute. I gotta stay on track with the specs. Surprisingly, this camera offers through the lens phase detection autofocus, not the contrast-based autofocus that was common of most point-and-shoot cameras at the time. It also has a shutter lock mechanism, which won't let you take a photo if the camera can't lock focus, so it will hopefully save you on wasting film on out-of-focus shots. The light meter for this camera has 2 segments to meter for the subject and background, i.e. the center and the things around it. Being a point-and-shoot camera, the Freedom Zoom does use DX codes to set the ISO of the film, and it accepts DX codes between ISO 25 and 3200. If you load a non-DX coded roll of film, it will default to ISO 25, not 100 like most cameras, so keep that in mind if you plan on using non-DX coded film. It does have automatic film rewinding, but the camera does also feature a button to let you manually rewind if you so choose before the roll is finished. As a quick aside, from the 3 rolls that I've shot in this camera so far, the film rewinding does take way longer than most cameras that I've used before, like long enough that the last time I was shooting with it, I started to take a video because I was kind of concerned that the camera broke on my 3rd roll, but it did finish and they've all finished and come out just fine. It just takes way longer than I think it does every single time, and I always get just a little bit nervous about it. The Freedom Zoom features a built-in flash and 4 different modes for you to choose from: auto pre-flash, auto flash, manual fill flash, and off. I didn't realize off was going to be one of the modes. This camera also includes a 10-second self timer and a rear LCD display to show you the important information that you need to know while you're out shooting. Unfortunately, as we covered earlier, my LCD screen does not work, so I'll put this picture on screen for you to get the idea. Now we come to the most interesting and probably controversial feature of this camera: Advanced Program Zoom, or APZ. Basically, when you pull your camera up to your eyes to shoot, it uses an IR sensor in the viewfinder to detect when you are looking through it, and automatically zooms into the optimal focal length for what you're shooting. What makes the focal length optimal, you may ask? That is a great question. I wish I could tell you, but the APZ section of the manual is surprisingly vague about what exactly is happening here, except that it is automatically zooming. Luckily, if we jump all the way down to the technical details part of the manual, we get a little bit more clarification. I'm quoting here: APZ, sensor activated, provides programmed selection of focal length setting based on subject distance. So there's no calculations or AI or computing or anything actually happening here. It is just looking at the focus distance and then zooming to a preset focal length that they picked when they were designing the camera. Presumably that is what the earlier section of the manual is talking about when it says, quote, produces framing similar to what might be set using manual control. On paper, this is a really cool idea, like in theory. I can imagine in the days of pre-internet, pre-computers being literally everywhere, pre-AI, that this must have felt like magic. Like you just pull the camera up to your eyes and it zooms in, and it's like pretty close to what you would want it to be if you zoomed in yourself. That's gotta feel like almost magic. We'll get back to how it feels in practice later in the video. I will note that APZ is on by default, and you have to manually override it every time you turn the camera on, because like most point and shoots of this era, it doesn't save your settings once you turn the power off, so you will have to do this every time you want to shoot with it, which is just a little bit annoying. The next section of the manual is about manual zoom control, and it starts with a sentence that I think is really funny. I'm quoting here: should you want to control the power zoom setting yourself, 2 options for power-assisted manual zoom control are available. Those 2 settings are one-shot override, which just overrides the APZ for 1 shot and then it will turn back on, or fixed override, which turns the APZ off until you power cycle the camera again. Okay, now that we've covered the specs, we can go down the filter thread rabbit hole. If you've used any kind of point-and-shoot camera before, whether it be film or digital, you'll know that filter threads are pretty much unheard of on point-and-shoot cameras. Most cameras have some kind of lens covering either built into the lens or built into the body cavity where the lens retracts. So adding some kind of additional height to the lens to add a filter thread is something that like pretty much no film camera manufacturer is going to want to do, except Minolta apparently. That's why when I use this camera, I've literally took videos of the camera and the lens to post on the internet, and I didn't even clock the filter thread on it because it's just not a thing that's on most film cameras, or any point and shoot cameras for that matter. I've like never seen it on another point and shoot. So what about a filter thread is so special, and why am I continually rambling about it? It just opens up a lot of possibilities for point and shoots that most of them don't have. Anything from an ND filter, or a color contrast filter for black and white, or a Pro Mist filter should you so choose, you can now use on this little camera with mostly no effort really. Most interesting for my black and white only this year kind of challenge is the ability to use color contrast filters on a point and shoot style camera. If you want to try this out as well, the only thing that you'll have to account for is the fact that most color contrast filters cut away some amount of the light that the camera is getting. With most rangefinder or SLR style cameras, this isn't a problem because you can just compensate for this and give it a little bit more light, but with most point and shoots you don't get the ability to change the ISO for the film or any of the metering itself, so you'll have to compensate for that reduced light in some way. For my test roll of this, I used a roll of Lomography Earl Grey, and I took advantage of the fact that the Freedom Zoom defaults to 25 ISO and not 100 ISO, so it already gave me a few extra stops of light anyways, and I used that to compensate for the reduced light that the camera was getting. So ISO 100 film, defaulting to 25 ISO, that gives me one more stop for the compensation for the color filter, and an extra stop just to be safe in case, you know. If you want to change the ISO to anything other than ISO 25 though, you'll need some of these. These are DX code stickers. They basically let you trick your camera into reading a different DX code than the box speed, so that you can shoot it at a different ISO for compensating for color filters or CPL filters, or if you just want to push your film or something like that. So, now that I've shot a few rolls through this camera, let's talk about the results and what I think about this camera in the long run. I think the Freedom Zoom 105i is a delightfully strange little camera. Like any good product of the 90s, some parts of it aged better than others. There are features on this camera that are still in use today, like phase detection autofocus, and there are things on this camera that we still haven't figured out today, like the eye detection, autofocus, or zoom, or whatever. Nor do I think most people would actually want that in a camera, regardless. But let's talk pros, cons, goods, bads. On the good side, the lens is absolutely incredible on this camera. I've become accustomed to just getting kind of fine results from point and shoot cameras if they resell for anything less than like $100 on eBay, but the results from this camera truly impressed me. I just can't get over how sharp and well exposed these photos came out. Like, this camera resells for $5 on eBay. What? Something like this scene, which is full of snow, usually gives older film cameras trouble because they want to make all of that white snow middle gray, but this came out really well exposed. I took a few scenes of snow photos like this, and they came out pretty well exposed for a point and shoot camera especially. Another big positive for me, again, is the filter threading. I know I've already talked about this a lot, But I love filters. Experimenting with different film and filter combinations and different cameras is one of my favorite parts of photography, so having this on a point and shoot camera is a huge deal for me. It's a really big game changer. It actually does make me want to shoot this camera more often than I would have if it didn't have a filter thread. Now let's move on to the bads, or at least the it's fine section. I think the one thing that everyone will immediately notice first and have an opinion on is the size. It's chunky, it's heavy, it's big, it doesn't travel easily, and I think that will turn some people off of it immediately. Personally, I don't mind it, at least when I'm shooting. It's kind of reassuringly heavy to me, like it feels good to shoot. I will say the size does make it kind of hard to carry around. It just doesn't quite have the like throw it in your pocket or your bag kind of factor that a lot of point and shoots have. It's not quite small enough for that purpose. I usually like to carry a shoulder bag with a book and a point and shoot around, but the size of the Freedom Zoom is really awkward for this purpose. If I use my Kobo e-reader, it fits well enough, but anything bigger than that really doesn't fit well, at least if I want to actually close it. I think the other divisive feature that might turn some people off is the automatic program zoom, or APZ. If it wasn't on by default, I don't think it would be as big of a deal, but having to remember to turn it off every time you shoot it can be a little bit tedious. It's also kind of annoying when you forget to turn it off and you raise the camera up to your eyes to shoot and suddenly it's zooming in for you. I don't take many shots that would make me lose the shot very often, but if you are the kind of person that takes like, oh, this is a cool shot, let me get this real quick, like kind of pictures, it might throw you off a few times, so it's something to keep in mind. Again, you can deactivate it, so it's not a big deal breaker for me, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't frustrating. I will give it that there have been a few times I forgot to turn it off, and it gave me a surprisingly interesting framing that I would not have thought of on my own, so I have to give at least 1 point back to the APZ for that. The last one isn't particular to this camera, it's more of just a general point and shoot thing that stops me from using them as often as I would like, and that is that the lens is kind of slow. Like I mentioned earlier, it's an f4 to f6.3 lens, which when you use something like a 100, 200 ISO film is really limiting. For example, it's been very gloomy in Boston the last few weeks, and I've been trying to go out and take pictures with this camera and other cameras, and I get out there and it's light enough out, but kind of gloomy, and I'm already struggling with the camera, like slowing the shutter speed down a lot, and consequently I've had a lot of rolls come out with some very blurry shots because the shutter speed slowed down far enough that it is now in the danger point for like handheld handshake. Again, this isn't particular to the Freedom Zoom, but it's just a general frustration that I've had recently with point and shoots, and it will stop me from using this camera more often than I would like, just because it makes it a little bit hard to shoot in certain conditions. Overall, the Minolta Freedom Zoom 105i very pleasantly surprised me, and I plan on shooting with it a lot in the coming months. The chunky 90s kind of aesthetic is very endearing to me, and the addition of the filter thread on this camera really makes it a powerhouse for black and white shooting. These cameras are currently selling on eBay for $5 to $20, which is an absolute steal for the quality and the fun that this camera offers. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, subscribing is the best way to keep up with my content so you get notified whenever a new video drops. Now that I'm back in the swing of making YouTube videos again, I'm aiming to release one new video a month covering something in the film photography zeitgeist. If you have a topic you're particularly interested in, please leave it in the comments down below, and I will add it to my list of future topics to cover in another video.